Creating an organizational chart. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is that Microsoft calls these organization charts. So that's what I will try to cleave to by way of vocabulary in this nugget. By contrast, I've historically referred to this diagram type as the organizational chart. Semantics aside, I think we both know what we're talking about. An organization chart is going to be a graphical depiction of the hierarchical structure of your organization. In other words, the people that comprise the organization. Typically at the top of that hierarchy is the president or chief executive officer, whatever. Underneath that individual, we tend to break it down by the senior management or perhaps vice presidents. And then so on down the line, we have managers and subordinates, etc., etc., etc. If you work in a very small shop, then you could, generally speaking, fit an org chart very easily on a single page. By contrast, large organizations may have hundreds or thousands of people plugged into their org charts, so we'll have to break that content across multiple pages. The good news is that the good folks at Microsoft have invested quite a bit of time in optimizing org chart creation in Visio. We're going to learn in this nugget how to build organization charts in two ways. We're going to use the automated route using the organization chart wizard. In that example, I'm going to show you how we can make use of external data instead of having to plug in the identity of each person in our organization as we go along. We're actually going to start though. We're going to do the organizational chart wizard with external data second. The first thing we're going to do is create and format an org chart from scratch so I can show you the building blocks of the org chart, and you'll then appreciate the automation that you get with the org chart wizard. Let's get to work. In this demonstration, we're going to build a couple organization charts in Visio 2010. We're looking at the finished product for the first org chart we're going to create. We're going to do, as we did in the previous nugget with flowcharts, we're going to use this finished product as our guideline for our project file, but we're not necessarily looking to replicate it exactly, because as we get teaching moments that come up spontaneously, I want to take advantage of those and show you as many Visio tips, tricks, and suggestions as possible. So what you're seeing here, friends, is a representative example of a hierarchical org chart. Now, there are folks who have leveraged the organizational chart add-in here in Visio to visualize more than human resources data. For instance, there's some inventive people who have built disk directory structures, both for Unix systems and as well as Windows systems, and I think you can see where that would work. In the Unix Linux file system, the top level block would represent slash, or the root of the drive, and then the second level would represent etc and your dev and all of your top level directories and so forth. So basically, I'm just reminding you here to be creative and be flexible. Now, speaking of flexibility, we're going to see that the org chart add-in that Microsoft gives us, as you see, the add-in comprises a separate ribbon tab called org chart that has all sorts of custom commands tailored specifically for org charts. We're going to have less flexibility in terms of moving objects around on the page. You're going to see in particular how much space is devoted to arranging objects in your organization chart as well as laying out those shapes. These tools here are going to be our friends. Once you start manually dragging and dropping, you can do that to a limited degree here, but I've found in my experience in building org charts in Visio, you're much better off by letting Visio do most of the heavy lifting, and we'll see that as we go along. So some extra bling we see on this org chart I've created. You'll note that in two cases, I'm the CEO, of course, of Nugget Lab team. I'm always the CEO in my own mind. I've added a picture here of myself, and I've also thrown in a picture for one of my VPs, who's actually not a VP, that's just fiction, but in real life, Steve Casely, you might recall, is one of my colleagues at CBT Nuggets. He does project management and agile and all that kind of stuff. But the pictures can really boost the impact of your org chart, as you see. This media team thing is representative of what Microsoft calls a team frame. It's a nice way to graphically depict teams that may span departments in your organization. This bottom employee here, you see a dashed line connecting that individual to this particular VP. That's a special kind of connector that's meant to denote a direct report. In other words, this particular person reports to the VP of sales, but at the same time maybe has another job function in which he or she reports to the VP of Infosys. So what I'm trying to say in a nutshell, and let me stretch out the shapes window to show you, is that the org chart add-in has quite a bit of flexibility, not only in terms of your traditional position shapes, executive, manager, position, consultant, vacancy, and assistant, but also in terms of, as I said, the team frame. You can denote staff where you're not giving individuals a block, but instead just a line, title, date. You have some helpful shapes to dress up the org chart, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let me close out of this document and let's come backstage to the new option in the business category and template categories. This is where we have our organization chart templates. And I want you to see first off that there are two templates, one called organization chart, the other one called organization chart wizard. Both of these templates are identical. They both have the organization chart add-in loaded. They both give you the same starter stencils, and all of the page layout options are the same. The only difference functionally and practically between these templates is that if you create a new org chart based on the wizard template, the first thing that happens is that Visio kicks open the organization chart wizard, which we're going to look at next. First, we're going to build an org chart from scratch, so I'll just select the organization chart template, ensure that my units are correct, and we'll click create. We see that our page layout is set to landscape, and as I said earlier, we have, looks like just one stencil, the organization charts stencil. We have the quick shapes that gives us what Microsoft thinks are going to be the most common shapes, and then of course more shapes if we want to load additional stencils. Let's make sure to save our work right off the top. I'm going to call this my org chart 1 to differentiate it from any additional org charts we'll be creating, and away we go. Let me double left click a ribbon tab to make sure that our ribbon comes down and stays. I also want to let you know that if you build an organization chart off of the standard template and you then later decide that you want to run the wizard after all, you do not have to close out of the document and come backstage, back to new, etc. You don't have to do that at all. Instead, what we need to do is navigate to the View ribbon tab, and over here in the Macros section, we can open the Add-ons dropdown, and in there, in the business category, it's getting cut off on the screen here a little bit, but what this actually says is Organization Chart Wizard, and if we give that a click, boom. So we always have the Org Chart Wizard available to us. Just don't worry about that. Now, based on our work in the previous nugget, we know all about adding shapes to the page. We can just drag and drop. Typically, the executive is going to represent the top level person in the organization, the CEO. So I'll just drag that out first, and as soon as we drop the shape on the page, we get this Connecting Shapes dialog. This is important. Don't just blow by this. What this is letting us know is to connect shapes in an organization chart, you drag and drop the subordinate shape on top of its superior shape. You see what's going on in the little picture here? So I'm going to click OK. And before I go any further, let me use one of my zoom techniques where we hold down Control Shift and then we draw a selection rectangle to zoom in selectively on the page. Another tip I want you to be aware of is how to pan with the mouse. The way you pan around with the mouse is again Control Shift, but you drag, click and drag, not the left button, but the right button. That allows you to quickly pan around. This is a very, very helpful tip, believe me. Now I'm going to click this top shape and I'm going to add, you notice that the data, the starter data in the shape says name and title. I'm going to follow that motif by typing my name. I'm going to click off that shape because a safer way to add shape data in the org chart is to do it with the shape data window. Now on the View tab where we already are, I'll open up task panes and select shape data. This is going to be an important guiding principle for us as we go through the rest of the course. As you remember from our Navigating Visio nugget where I walked you through all of these buttons down on the status bar, and I mentioned for instance that you can open pan and zoom to quickly go to a fine area on the page and so forth. Well, as you see, shape data is another flyout window that we can resize to tuck out of the way or bring it out depending upon how big you want it to be. You notice also this little push pin. Check this out. If you close the push pin, it creates what's called an auto hide, where it puts the window off onto the side, and then when you hover your mouse over it, it slides the window out. Now it says no shape data because I've deselected the shape. If I deselect the shape and then hover over the shape data window, you'll notice that my data is now filled in. Let me click the push pin to keep the shape data out. Now, something that you really need to understand, friends, is that all of your shapes in Visio have metadata, or data about the shape, attached to it. And this is one of the things that makes Visio so dynamic and powerful for us IT managers. Yes, you can add additional data fields to a shape. We'll learn how to do that in a future nugget. But in this introduction, we're just going to work with the default data fields. And these are, in fact, context sensitive. For instance, if we were to go to a shape dealing with computer networking, in fact, let me do that. I'll come out into Network and choose Active Directory Objects. If I were to bring out a computer shape, we wouldn't expect, for instance, to have shape data that would say things like telephone, name, title, and email. Those are already associated here with this shape. It looks like, unfortunately, I think I chose an unfortunate shape for this example, there are no shape data fields pre-built into this computer shape. But what I'm getting around to is that the type of data we'd want to store for a computer shape would be things like host name, IP address, location, username, etc. So shape data is really crucial in Visio, and I'm just going to add my title field in here as CEO and press enter, and you notice that that gets populated into the visible area of the shape immediately. Good deal. Now I'm going to close my Active Directory Object stencil. Do you remember how to close stencils? We can right click and select close to get rid of it. Now let's add one or more VPs, or manager level shapes, underneath the CEO. Remember what that dialog showed us. It said if we want to attach a subordinate shape to a superior one, drag it on top. Simple as that. If you want to do it again, drag it on top, and so forth. And you'll notice that Visio starts to route the shapes. It looks like it's going to the right and then the left. It's going to continue to go right, left, right, left, right. And it's also placing those shapes, as you see, in a horizontal structure. Now I'm going to show you over on the organizational chart tab, you can switch these up in any way you want to. I'm just going to use first names here. I'm going to say Joe, Jane, Tony, and Tina. As you see, I've messed those up. I put the name in the title field. Let me quickly correct that. There we go, just like magic, right? So we have Joe, Jane, Tony, and Tina, and I've just quickly assigned them VP positions. Remember, the data itself is irrelevant here. We want you to really understand how to build the diagram proper. Now, first thing I do when I'm creating an org chart is make sure I get the hierarchy correct before I start monkeying around with formatting. That's going to be something that we follow as a general rule throughout this training. I also mentioned to you that you want to be careful dragging and dropping these shapes around. You see what I mean? If I wanted to switch Tina and Tony's position, I've used my button and look what happened. With 2 mouse clicks, I've now made Tina a subordinate to Tony. Well, that's not what I want. So let me use the undo a couple times to bring Tina back to where she should be. If I wanted to reverse their positions, as I told you earlier at the start of this training, your best bet is to use the formatting and layout and arrangement tools that Visio has in the org chart add-in directly. So let me make sure that the Tina shape is selected. And you see on the Arrange tab, we have Move Left Up, Move Right Down. Well, I'm going to move left. And that moved Tina a couple places to the left, didn't it? Let me select Tina again, and it moves her to the left or right of Tony, respectively. Well, I made her go to the left of Tony, and that brings Jane over to the right, and that's just peachy with me. If we want to start adding subordinates to our VPs, let me do a Control-Shift-Right drag to move my drawing up a bit, up and over, and actually I'll pin back the shape data to give us a little bit more room to move yet. The next level under the manager or the VP is the position shape. And really, because each of these has their own shape data, your best bet is to play according to Microsoft's rules. That is, use executive as your top level item, use your manager as your second level item, and use position as your third level item. That's really going to give you the best bang for your buck. And remember the deal, we want to drag right onto the superior position. So we've got 3 for Joe, and let's add 3 for Tina. And you're probably already forming questions like, Tim, this is looking nuts. What am I going to do? Let's add 2 for Tony, and let's go nuts, and let's add 6 for Jane. Check this out. If you're adding a whole bunch of positions, instead of doing them one at a time like I'm doing for Jane here, you can come a little bit farther down the stencil to either multiple shapes or 3 positions. 3 positions, bada bing, bing bada boom adds 3 positions to that particular level. If you drag multiple shapes out, let me do that for Joe. It asks you, number 1, how many shapes you want to bring out. I'll bump this up to 4. And it also gives us the added flexibility of asking us what kind of shape. I'm going to leave this on position, but you notice that we have all of our shapes available. It's a really helpful dialog box. But what's not helpful, if I can click here to fit page on current window, Visio has auto-spawned 2 additional pages here. Our page setup options, if we go to the design page, are set to, as we know, landscape orientation, 8.5 by 11 letter-sized paper. This, by the way, we haven't talked about this button yet. This is on by default. It's page auto size, and this is what's responsible for Visio auto-spawning additional pages. So as you see here, because the horizontal layout of our subordinates has exceeded the width of the page, Visio has auto-spawned a page on either side to accommodate that. I would suggest you keep auto size on, and then I'll show you later how we can adjust if we do want to cram everything on a single page. Actually, let's address that sooner rather than later. Let me click off to deselect, Control Shift, and do a marquee zoom to come in a little tighter here. We have an issue, and that is this horizontal layout of all of these subordinates is really confusing the picture. So let's use the organization chart layout tools to our advantage, and let's select a superior shape. I'll start with Joe. And what we have here are layout options, both horizontal and vertical. Now, I almost always go vertical because horizontal, as you see, the shapes bump into each other too much. But you notice that horizontal has several options, a lot of really cool options, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. Vertical has even more, left, center left, left offset, etc. Why don't we start with center left? That really cleans up the page, doesn't it? Now note that that affected only Joe, so we're going to need to apply the same formatting to our subsequent VPs. I'm going to choose the center left option for each of these, and that really cleaned things up. It actually brought our document down to a single page. Now, Joe has an awful lot of folks underneath him. If he has any more, his subordinate list is going to go off the page, isn't it? So we can select the superior shape and select side by side to do kind of a branching like you see there. And we can bring him over if we want to give him some more room. Like I said, I don't want to scare you off from using your mouse. It's not verboten. For things like you just saw, giving Joe a little bit more room, and let me bring Tina over, Tony, I'll just give each of these folks a little bit more room to move. And matter of fact, let's select Jane's block and let's do a single side by side for her subordinates as well. Just makes things, gives you a little bit more breathing room. So that's the bottom line really as far as your most common shapes, your executive, manager, and position. You just pop them in there, and then on the org chart tab, you choose layout options. You can move to the left or the right by selecting the appropriate shape and then determining which direction. You can actually move shapes up the tree if you want to. Let me again do a focused zoom here, and let's just add some shape data to this guy. I'm going to call him Oscar Ops Associate, adding some data here so we can actually see the difference. Everybody else is just name and title. And these buttons, a little bit confusingly in my humble opinion, I wish that there were separate buttons for up and down, but I can see where Microsoft wanted to simplify. If we wanted to move Oscar up the tree here, we can just select move left/up. And gradually, boom, 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 he gets repositioned. You can also go in the opposite direction if you want to. So again, that's how you would do that. Let me come back to full screen view, and let's look at some of these other shapes we have available to us. If we wanted to add a consultant to the tree, again, it's just a question of clicking on the superior shape. If there's a vacancy, again, we add it. It just displays a little bit differently. Let's again zoom in tight so we can see. I'll add the title consultant and name to be hired, and this is a vacancy in IT, support associate to be hired. So they're just graphically displayed a little bit differently from the other shapes. And assistant, if I as CEO have an assistant, I can just again add that shape to the list. And you notice that the connector is dynamically associated and dynamically routed, just like we saw with the flowchart options. Now, as your organization chart gets busier and busier, specifically where you have managers with increasing increasing numbers of subordinates, it might be desirable to contract or expand those superiors. So we can select Joe, for instance, who's superior over these 7 people and a consultant position, and click Show Hide Subordinates. You see what happens here? Visio creates, again, a different icon to let us know that this guy is contracted. We can do the same thing with Tina. And then by contrast, if we want to reveal what's underneath each VP, we can select their shape and click Show Hide Subordinates again. You can change a position type by selecting the position and then change position type. Let's assume that this individual left the company, so now it's a vacancy. There you have it. It's just select the shape, change position type. You don't have to delete the shape and recreate it. That's not necessary to do at all. As far as making the layout of the page a little bit easier to understand, let me fit page to current window and see what we've got. We could spend time just manually dragging and dropping to make this a little bit more pleasing, but we have layout tools available to us right here in Visio. In particular, on the org chart ribbon tab under layout, we have best fit to page. The screen tip tells us that this will automatically rearrange the organization chart to fit the current page. That can be helpful, and boy, with one click, that did a really nice job, didn't it? Let me step back and undo that, and there's also relayout. This automatically rearranges the shapes, preserving the layout styles chosen. Again, it did a pretty darn decent job. Wow, I like that even more. Now, as I showed you with the flowchart drawing we did previously, a nice technique that I do if I find that the drawing's a little bit too compact for the given page is you can draw a selection rectangle around the entire document. You need to make sure that on the Home tab you are using the pointer tool. And then you can come to a corner resize handle and resize the whole thing as a group. Once you have the group selected, you can drag the org chart around, and you can use your nudge controls also using the arrow keys. While we're here, we can dress the thing up using themes. Open the themes gallery, you get an auto preview, and we can add a background, which I'm not going to do quite yet. Save our changes. I do want to add a title. So on the organization chart shapes, let's bring title out. I'm going to put it over onto the side here. If you move it over too much, again, the auto size kicks in and we get an extra page. So let me bump that over a little bit. Use my drag zoom, double left click to select inside, add my text. I don't need department name, so I'm going to use the mouse to select this and press delete. Something else I want you to see, when you double left click in a text box, of course, you can come back home and use your font and paragraph controls to your heart's content. But something else that's helpful is that you get this little pop-up palette that gives you those same commands. So definitely make use of that. Bottom line is, as soon as the text is selected, you have the little format palette show up that gives you, let me quickly introduce you to these buttons, the ability to change the font, and yes, you get a font preview, very helpful. The font size and points, we can make a selection from the list, or we can bump up the size one size at a time, either ascending or descending. You can send the shape backwards or forwards depending upon how you're layering shapes. Bold, italic, justification, font color. If you want to use a different color, you can just choose that from the list. If you want to make a background fill, you can do that. Line, if you want a border line, and then format painter. So that's all well and good. Let's come back to our full page view and save our work. Let's come over to View for a second, and assuming that we didn't want to use a background this time, you remember over on Design, we can add a background page to give us the Nugget Lab team that I did, that you can download at nuggetlab.com, has this one applied, the world background. But let's say in this case we don't want to use a background, but instead we just want to be able to print this as is. Now if we go to File, Print, you remember that there's Print Preview, and Print Preview, as you see, will not print the grid lines, which is a really handy thing to understand. Let's close Print Preview. By contrast, if you were going to display this on a projector in a business meeting or whatever, you could come down to the status bar area. You see Full Screen, which, as you see, the screen is going past where I'm recording in this demo, so it probably doesn't look all that good. But trust me when I tell you, and I'm going to hit Escape to come out of full screen view. That's an excellent way to display your Visio in a presentation format. That also suppresses the grid lines. But if you wanted to suppress the grid lines just in your work here in Visio, you can toggle all of that information, not just the grid. As you see, I'm turning the grid on and off, but you can suppress the ruler, page break indications, which I love in Visio 2010 to see where your printable area ends, and guides, which we haven't talked about yet. But this is all in the View tab in the Show area. This is a very helpful area of the interface for sure. A couple more things I want to show you before we use the organization chart wizard with external data. Let's come back to org chart. You'll remember on the sample diagram that we're basing this one on, I had pictures associated with a couple shapes. Let me show you how easy it is to add any kind of graphic. It doesn't have to be a headshot image, but certainly if this represents the staff of your organization, it can really make it a lot easier to associate names with faces if you do include headshot images. And check this out. You select the appropriate shape, and on the org chart ribbon tab in the picture area, we click Insert. It's as simple as that. You browse to the location of your file. As you see down in the files of type, any current graphic is going to be available here, whether it's PNG or GIF or JPEG, even scalable vector graphics, which is the new standard with HTML. Just as easy as that. There you go. That's yours truly. That's what I looked like a year or so ago. I'm grateful to report I'm a bit thinner than that now. If you don't want to show the pictures, you can just click Show Hide. If you don't have a shape selected first, you get this message box, which reminds us to select a shape first and then click Show Hide. So what this means is you can selectively show hide pictures. If you're wondering if the pictures print, let's come back to Print Preview, and sure enough, they do print. So if you don't want to print the pictures on the printed page, then you would definitely want to come back here, select the appropriate shapes, and suppress the picture from display. The team frame is meant to denote, as I said earlier, a logical team, basically a collection of individuals that spans departments. So you can drag the team frame out, and you see it comes out as an initial size, so you have to determine using your resize handles how large you want it to be. So let me use my zoom control here, and let's just assume that Jane is going to be part of this new team, and we can use the bottom resize, the size resize to bring it that way, and let's say Tony and one of his reports, not all, are going to be part of this virtual team. Now what you see immediately here, friends, is what if this person here is part of the virtual team? How can you get this guy into Jane's virtual team? Well, we know how to do that, don't we? First, let's add some shape data. Let me call this person Tracy. Title is team member. We can select Tracy and move her up until she's part of that team. It's as simple as that. What else do we see that needs a little bit of nudging? Looks like Tina, we're seeing a little overlap here, so let's manually drag Joe over a bit, manually drag Tina over a little bit, and then we can select the team title, bring it out just a little bit more. So that's looking better. Now, one thing that I don't like, frankly, about the team frame is that you can't move the team title. You see here, it's actually really hard to select. Let me move it up a little, double left click until it's selected, and I'm going to press delete to get rid of it completely, and then I can bring the frame back down to where it was. I don't like the placement of it at all because it steps on adjoining shapes. Now we can address this by adding a text box, which is by far one of the top 3 most common shape types you'll be using in Visio. We can get to this from the Home tab, as you see, and you just drag out an initial size for the text box, add some text, come back to the pointer tool, and then you can move that label wherever you want to on the screen. It is in fact a shape. You see the rotate handle, you see the resize handles, just like any other shape. And you can group it, you can do whatever you want. We'll get to that more later in the course. So that's how the team frame works. Really nice way to do business. Finally, the dynamic report or dotted line report. If we, for instance, had this individual here reporting to Tina, we can take this and just boop, glue it to one side of that individual's shape, grab the other side, dock it to Tina, and the dashed line shows that we have a nexus or connection between those folks. Now, if you're wondering why the line jumps look like they do and why these connectors are curved, you have to remember that those elements are part of these themes. So if you decide to use a theme, you might have some results that you didn't expect. So let me save my work, come out full screen one more time, and that's really our finished product. I don't think we have to go any further than that. That looks really, really good. Now, remember I mentioned that when org charts get really, really large, they're going to, by definition, extend to more than one page, and that's true. So let me show you quickly how to break an organization chart. Again, a little bit confusing nomenclature. Microsoft calls it creating a synchronized copy. So if we wanted Joe's information brought out onto a different page, we can select Joe and click Create Synchronized Copy. We get a dialog box that says, where do you want this on? A new page or on the existing page? Well, certainly we want a new page. And in order to save space on the original page, we have an option to hide subordinates on the original, which I'm going to select. We click OK, and you see what happened is now Joe is on his own page with all of his subordinates. And then on page 1, we see Joe rolled up. Now that's caused a problem with this direct report, isn't it? We're going to have to do something creative to fix that. For now, I'm going to select the direct report line, press delete to get rid of it. But that's definitely cleaned up the interface. Now we can still expand Joe by selecting him and choosing show hide subordinates. That's fine. But if we have anything to do over here on Joe's page, we can do it, and the data is synchronized across those pages. Like, let's say underneath Oscar, we have Zoe, who's also an ops associate. You might wonder, well, what happens if we come back to page 1? Is Zoe going to show up? Well, let's select Joe, reveal the subordinates, and sure enough, there's Zoe. Good deal. So without any further ado, friends, let's now move on to using the organization chart wizard. In the second exercise, we're going to build an org chart using the wizard and also one that connects us to external data. Now, the reason why the external data piece is important is that you may have all of your organization information, that is to say, employee name, title, who they report to, etc., in your human resources database. So why reinvent the wheel? The idea is if you can export your HR data in a readable format, and by readable format, it doesn't have to be Excel, but it's nice if it is. Any delimited format, like comma-separated values, would work just fine. We can absorb that or bring that into Visio and have Visio create an org chart automatically. It's really quite nice how it works. Let's show you how that works right now, as a matter of fact. From Visio, Backstage, New, we'll go into the Business category, select Org Chart Wizard, and Create. As promised, the only difference is we have all the same shapes, all the same page layout options. The Org Chart Wizard opens by default. And the question it asks us here, first of all, is are we creating the org chart from information that's already stored in a file or database, or are we going to enter it as you go along? That's really not a very comfortable way to go. I would strongly recommend that you have external data if you're going to use the wizard, which we do. We're asked, where is your data? This is really cool. If you have your HR data stored in Microsoft Exchange, you can tap into Exchange Server Directory Services directly. Most common way I've found is a text file or an Excel file, a separated value file, or you can pipeline directly into your line of business database. Systems administrators get a little touchy sometimes about direct access to data sources, so we're going to go with the middle option as a middle-of-the-road solution. We're asked to browse to find where our data file is located. This path is correct. You can click Browse to locate that file. I have a sample file, and you can get this file too from Nugget Lab called orgchartdata.xlsx. This is an Excel 2010 spreadsheet I created. Very, very simple. Couple points if you're going to use Excel to import your data. First of all, make sure that you don't have anything else other than the data you need. In other words, make sure that the first row of the spreadsheet contains your column headers, and then immediately underneath that put your data and just leave it alone. Don't have any charts off to the side. You don't want to choke or confuse Visio. You also want to use the least number of fields possible. The most common ones are what you're seeing here. The person's name, their title, who they report to. This is particularly important to denote the subordinate relationship to the superior and to lay out those shapes correctly. And then any additional data fields you add in Excel are going to be added as data fields in Visio. So if you want to track department name, you can do that as well. So that's what our source data looks like in this example. The language, fine in this case. We'll click Next. We're asked which columns in the data file contain the information that defines the organization. It asks us for a name, and it's pulling from the first row in the spreadsheet those column names. Name is correct. Reports to, we have manager, that's correct. First name, we're not using that, so we'll leave that none and click Next. Next, we're asked which fields from the data file do we want to show. Remember that when we created our org chart, we had name and title. Here, by default, it's pulling across 3 of the 4, name, title, and department. You can select one of these and jog them up or down if you want to. This is actually a live preview that shows you what the shape will look like. Pat Finnegan is in fact the CEO in the executive department of my organization. It's a nice touch that Microsoft gives us that. Click Next. We're asked which fields do we want to add as shape data fields. I would recommend you add everything, because even though you don't have to display all those fields on your org chart, it's nice to have them embedded in your document just because. It's always nice to have flexibility. So I'm going to make sure that all of my fields are underneath shape data fields and click Next. Finally, we're asked where is the org chart going to be. It tells us that, first of all, we may have too many employees to fit on one page, so you have some options. I want to specify how much of my organization will display on each page. That's kind of the micromanager's approach. The default is I want the wizard to automatically break my organization chart across pages, and the name, or basically the repeating shape at the top of each page, by default is top executive. If you want to override that, you can, and these are all the unique names in my source file. I'm going to manually select Pat Finnegan. That is the superior shape for the entire organization. You can also have Visio automatically create hyperlinks to move from one page to another. And if you do have shapes across pages, synchronization is something you should absolutely keep enabled. And we saw how the synchronization works in the previous example. Let's click Finish. And without any muss, fuss, or greasy aftertaste, Visio has given us our org chart. Let's zoom in a little and take a closer look and see what we have. There's Pat Finnegan, our CEO. It looks like we have 3 second-level senior folks, and then each individual has some shapes underneath him or her. In other words, Visio did a pretty nice job of laying out the shapes here. Wouldn't you agree? Let's come out to full screen view. You might wonder, well, I know how to organize subordinates. In other words, in the previous example, we selected a superior shape, and then on the org chart tab, we used some of these options over here under layout. Can we do the same thing globally? What if we wanted this org chart to work more vertically rather than horizontally? Can we do that? Can we select Pat Finnegan, for instance, and select one of these options from the layout area? The answer to that question is absolutely we can. The results may not be exactly what you want. Let me step back. That doesn't look all that good. What we might want to do is then select each subordinate and choose a left option for them. I'm doing some manual dragging here. Basically, I'm just trying to get creative. And we can always come back to relayout to have Visio try to make it a little bit better yet. Are we getting there? I'm not sure if I'm making more of a mess here or less of a mess. Let's come back to design and first of all change this to portrait orientation. It really depends on what you want. Let's draw a selection rectangle around everything and move it as close as possible to the top of the page. So we've brought everything to a single page again. But I just want to again encourage you above all else to play around with these tools, get really comfortable with them, and understand that we always have our friendly undo control at our beck and call. You notice that next to the undo control actually there's a little drop down arrow, and if you open that up it gives you a run of the last dozen or so changes you've made. Now unfortunately, if I wanted to selectively undo just this layout option, it would take me back in time and not only undo that but undo everything I've done after that, you see? So it's not a true selective undo, but it's better than nothing. If you come backstage and go to Options, in the advanced area of options, you'll notice here we have a maximum number of undos property. 20 is the default. You can actually crank that up. I believe it's 99, which is going to require more memory on your system to track that many steps. I'm going to keep it on 20. But it is a flexible option that you should be aware of as a Visio power user. Creating an org chart review. At this point, you understand the purpose of the org chart, and you understand very intimately how Visio enables us to create an organization chart. We first learned how to do that from scratch using the org chart shapes, and then we used the org chart wizard, and I showed you how you can save data entry time by pipelining in your external data and attaching it to the org chart. Along the way, we've given you lots of tips and tricks, and we're going to just keep building on those tips and tricks as we proceed through the course. Remember, practice makes progress. It may not result in perfection, perfection. Maybe it will sometimes, but I'm always happy for steady progress. I don't know about you. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.